Smell comes first. Not the smell of coffee, not the smell of a Saturday morning in April. It is heavy, sharp, and entirely wrong. Dior Sauvage. Way too much of it. Then the sound. Metal hangers clinking against the wooden rod in the closet. The heavy, distinctive click of a silver belt buckle snapping into place. My eyes are still closed, but my brain is already trying to sort the data. These are Tuesday sounds, Wednesday sounds. These are not the sounds that belong in our house at 7:15 on a Saturday morning. I open my eyes. The light from the bedroom window is bright, filtering through the blinds, painting harsh yellow stripes across the floorboards. Spring in Houston always comes on too strong. Archer stands in front of the full-length mirror. He is adjusting the collar of a slim-fit navy Oxford shirt. The fabric is perfectly pressed. He sweeps a hand over his dirty blonde hair, checking his reflection with the kind of intense focus he usually saves for closing a major account. On top of the Oxford shirt is something else. Something invisible but loud. Effort. This is the shirt he wears when he wants to impress someone. Morning, babe. Archer's voice is light, casual. So casual it feels rehearsed. Got a work emergency. Hendricks called about a pipeline issue out in Midland. I don't say anything right away. I lift my left wrist and look at the watch strapped there. It is a cheap Timex. The glass face is scratched, and the brown leather band is frayed at the edges. My mother gave it to me a long time ago. Looking at it first thing on my birthday is a private ritual, a quiet way to remember her. Today is Saturday, April the 12th, my 37th birthday. Hendricks. Pipeline. Midland. The words sit in the air between us. They are clean, specific, and entirely too detailed. An amateur liar stays vague. A professional liar provides an itinerary. He walks over to the edge of the bed and leans down. He presses a quick, mechanical kiss to my forehead. It is a check-in kiss, a box ticked on a list of morning chores. As he pulls back, the Dior Sauvage hits me again, layered over a fresh splash of expensive aftershave. He only uses the aftershave when he goes out in the evening, never at dawn. A pipeline issue? I keep my voice entirely neutral. No accusation. Just clarification. I am Jolene Sadler, 37 years old, a forensic bookkeeper for Hargrove Construction. I audit $40 million contracts for a living. I know exactly how to ask a question without sounding like I am setting a trap. On a Saturday? You know Hendricks. Archer flashes his wide, deal-closing smile. The kind of smile that makes strangers hand over their money and trust him with their lives. But his right hand reaches up and adjusts that perfectly pressed collar a second time. The guy doesn't know what day of the week it is. Total panic mode. I sit up slowly, pulling the sheet around my waist. What time will you be back? Afternoon. He grabs his keys off the dresser. Maybe late afternoon. Depends on how bad the leak is. I'll call you. He walks out of the bedroom. I hear the heavy thud of his shoes on the hardwood floor of the hallway. Dress shoes. Leather soles. Not steel-toed boots. Not sneakers. You do not wear leather-soled dress shoes to inspect a pipeline emergency in Midland. I pull on a robe and follow the sound of his footsteps out to the kitchen. Beck is sitting at the island counter. My 8-year-old son is staring down at a bowl of cereal, chewing slowly. He looks up at his father, then looks at me. He has eyes that are too old for his face, taking in the atmosphere of the room without knowing exactly what the weather means. On the granite counter next to the coffee maker sits an envelope. Archer taps it with 2 fingers as he passes. Left something for you, he says. Happy birthday, Joe. Beck, I say, keeping my voice steady. Say bye to Daddy. Bye, Dad. Beck doesn't look up from his spoon. The door leading to the garage opens and closes. A moment later, the deep rumble of the BMW engine vibrates through the wall. I used to find that sound reassuring. The sound of a provider heading out to take care of his family. Now, it is just the sound of a hollow space opening up in my house. I walk over to the counter and pick up the envelope. I slide my thumb under the flap and pull out the card. It is a generic Hallmark print. A picture of a cake on the front. Inside, there is no personal message. No long paragraph about 12 years of marriage. Just a rushed scrawl in black ink. Happy birthday, baby. Not love. Archer. Not yours. Just the letter A. Like signing off a corporate email. I leave the card on the counter and wrap both hands around my coffee mug. The ceramic is warm, but my fingers are freezing. My left thumb starts tapping against the side of the mug. It is an old habit. My brain only does that when it is running numbers, searching for the missing decimal point in a ledger. Oxford shirt. Dress shoes. Dior Sauvage. Saturday morning. Midland. The column does not add up. I push the thought down. I bury it deep, right next to the memories of every time he came home late, every time his phone was placed face down on the dinner table, every time a client dinner stretched past 11 at night. Pushing it down is a survival skill. I mastered it a long time ago. My mother taught me how to do it, not with words, but by watching her sit by the window for 10 years, waiting for a man who was never coming back. Mom? Beck's voice is quiet. Can we go to the zoo today? Since Dad is working, I look at my son. I force the corners of my mouth up into a smile. Yeah, baby, we can go to the zoo. Beck pushes his cereal bowl away. Why does he always have to work on weekends? The question hangs there. I swallow hard. The lie is right there on my tongue, ready to be deployed. Daddy works hard for us, right? I say it softly, almost like an apology. Beck nods slowly. Yeah, I tell him, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Daddy works hard for us. I hate myself the second the sentence leaves my lips. My voice echoes in my own ears, sounding exactly like my mother 26 years ago, sitting on a worn-out sofa, explaining why my father missed another dinner. I take the generic Hallmark card and drop it into the junk drawer next to the refrigerator. I push the drawer shut. I pack a bag for the zoo. My phone stays quiet in my purse all morning, right until 11:47. The Houston Zoo is suffocating by midday. The April sun beats down on the concrete pathways, radiating heat back up through the soles of my shoes. We are standing near the giraffe exhibit. Beck is practically vibrating with excitement, pointing at a young calf stretching its neck toward a high branch. The air smells like hot asphalt, spilled lemonade, and damp earth. I pull my phone out of my pocket to take a picture of Beck pointing. A notification drops down from the top of the screen. 11:47. It is a message from an unknown number. No name attached, no text, no context, just a single photograph. The sounds of the zoo instantly vanish. The screaming toddlers, the grinding gears of the motorized tram, the low hum of the misting fans, all of it drops away into a thick, rushing static inside my ears. I stare at the screen. The image is crystal clear. It is a restaurant patio. Sunlight hits the edge of a white tablecloth. Across the table sits a woman with auburn hair, maybe 38 years old, her head thrown back in a genuine, effortless laugh. Sitting across from her, leaning in close, is a man wearing a perfectly pressed, slim-fit navy Oxford shirt. Archer. But it is not the shirt that stops the breath in my chest. It is the center of the table. His hand is resting on the white linen. Her hand is resting on top of his. Their fingers are completely interlaced. This is not the touch of old friends catching up. This is not a stray gesture over a business lunch. Fingers interlaced is a claim. It is the kind of grip that belongs to two people who belong to each other. Mom? Mom, look! The baby giraffe is eating the leaves! Beck's voice sounds like it is coming from underwater. I blink, trying to force oxygen back into my lungs. The Texas heat suddenly feels like a freezer. I see it, baby, I manage to say. I see it, but I do not see the giraffe. I only see his hand, the same hand that patted my shoulder this morning before walking out the door. The same hand that wrote a single letter A on a generic piece of cardboard. There is no message beneath the picture. Whoever sent this does not need to explain anything. The image does all the talking. My thumb hovers over the screen. I press save. The photo moves into my camera roll. I delete the notification from the lock screen, making sure there is no trace of it on the surface of the phone. Then I slide the device back into my pocket. My hands are shaking. Fine. Uncontrollable tremors running from my wrists down to my fingertips. I ball my hands into fists and shove them deep into the pockets of my jeans. I turn toward my son. My voice is perfectly level when I speak. Let's go see the elephants, Beck. The elephant exhibit is exactly 200 steps away. I know this because I count every single one of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. When the world shatters, a forensic bookkeeper relies on the only thing that cannot lie: numbers. Counting is an anchor. It gives my brain a task, something to hold on to while the rest of my life burns to the ground. By the time we reach the car in the parking lot, the temperature has climbed to 91 degrees. The interior of the SUV smells like hot leather and stale air conditioning. I buckle Beck into his booster seat in the back. The heat and the walking have worn him out. Within 3 minutes of the engine turning over, his breathing slows and deepens into the steady rhythm of sleep. I sit in the driver's seat, the engine running, the cold air blasting from the vents. I place the phone on the dashboard. I pull the photo up again. The initial shock is fading, making way for something colder, sharper. The forensic side of my brain takes the wheel. I do what I do every Monday through Friday at Hargrove Construction. I analyze the data. I zoom in on the shadows cast by the wine glasses on the table. They are short and directly underneath the stems. High noon. The photo was taken recently, likely within the last hour. I look at the background behind the auburn-haired woman. Exposed brick wall. A trellis covered in purple wisteria. A wrought iron sign slightly out of focus in the upper right corner. I can make out the last 4 letters. Ista. I open a browser window and type in the search terms. Restaurants Houston Patio Vista. The third result provides a match. Bella Vista, an upscale Italian restaurant located in the Montrose neighborhood. Dollar signs indicate it is wildly expensive. It is a place you go for anniversaries, for celebrations. It is absolutely not a pipeline in Midland. I sit back against the leather seat. My knuckles are white, gripping the steering wheel. The ghost of the notification chime keeps ringing in my head, a tiny digital bell signaling the end of a 12-year marriage. I open my contacts. I scroll past my friends, past my coworkers. I scroll down to the letter O. Opal Sadler, Archer's mother. Why Opal? I do not consciously process the decision. My thumb is moving before my brain formally approves the action. But beneath the surface, the logic is flawless. 28 years ago, Opal divorced Floyd Sadler because he could not keep his hands off his secretary. Opal raised Archer alone. She worked 2 jobs, she survived, and when Archer and I wanted to buy this house, Opal co-signed the $480,000 mortgage. But she did it with a single, absolute stipulation. She looked her son dead in the eye at the closing table and laid out her boundary. Opal is the only person on earth who holds genuine power over Archer. Not emotional power. He does not care enough about anyone's feelings to be controlled by them. Financial power. I attach the saved photo. I do not type a message. No context, no greeting. I press send. Just like the stranger who sent it to me, I let the image speak for itself. I put the phone in the cup holder. I watch the digital clock on the dashboard. 12 minutes pass. 720 seconds of nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the soft sound of Beck breathing in the back seat. Then the phone vibrates. The name Opal lights up the screen. I answer. Hello? Jolene. Opal's voice does not sound like a mother-in-law calling to wish someone a happy birthday. It is a voice I have never heard from her before. It is low, measured. It is the sound of a steel door swinging shut. It is controlled. Absolute fury. Yes, ma'am, I answer softly. That is my son. In that picture? Yes, ma'am. Silence stretches over the line. 4 heavy seconds drag by. I signed that mortgage on one condition, Opal says, her voice slicing through the static. 1. And he knows exactly what it was. The line clicks dead. She does not say goodbye. She does not offer sympathy. She does not need to. I sit in the running car and wait. I know what is going to happen next. I open the Find My Family app on my phone. We set it up years ago, sharing locations for safety. Archer never turns his off because he assumes I never look at it. At 12:54, a banner drops down across the top of my screen. Opal Sadler calling Archer Sadler. He declines the call. The banner disappears. 5 seconds later, it drops down again. Opal Sadler calling. Declined. I sit there and count. Every time her name pops up, I tally it. 10 times. 20 times. He is sitting at a table with another woman, looking at his phone, watching his mother's name flash across the screen, and frantically hitting the red button. 31 times. On the 32nd call, the banner stays up. He answered. I switch my eyes to the map on the screen. Archer's blue dot is stationary at Bella Vista in Montrose. The call lasts exactly 5 seconds. I cannot hear what Opal says to him, but I do not need to. It is probably fewer than 10 words. I saw the picture. We need to talk about the mortgage. The call ends. Instantly, the blue dot on the map begins to move. It leaves Montrose. It heads west toward Westheimer. The speed indicator on the app updates. He is doing 47 miles an hour, on a road where the speed limit is 35. He is driving like a man running from a fire. A strange sensation washes over me. I expect to feel devastated. I expect to feel terrified of what tomorrow looks like. But sitting in the hot car, watching that blue dot race across the digital map, I feel something entirely different. Clarity. For years, things felt slightly off. Small inconsistencies, unexplained absences, money that vanished from the checking account and was explained away as sudden expenses. I had ignored the math to protect my marriage. But right now, the numbers are locking into place. Archer plus the Oxford shirt plus a Saturday morning lie equals the truth in the photograph. The ledger is finally balancing. And I am the best person in Houston at making sure a ledger balances. Beck shifts in the back seat, rubbing his eyes. Mom, are we home? I put the car in gear. My hands are no longer shaking. The frayed leather of my mother's Timex rubs comfortably against my wrist. Steady, reliable. Almost, baby, I say, pulling out of the parking lot. We are almost home. We are sitting in the kitchen at 3:20 in the afternoon when the door from the garage opens. I have already set Beck up in the living room with his headphones on, deeply invested in a video game. Archer walks in. He drops his keys on the counter. The scent hits me immediately. The heavy cologne is gone, sweated away or masked by something else. The smell of roasted garlic, rich olive oil, and fresh basil clings to his clothes. The distinct aroma of high-end Italian food. Bella Vista. How is Midland? I ask. I do not stand up from my stool at the island. I do not look up from the magazine I am pretending to read. Archer freezes, just for a fraction of a second. The hesitation is barely visible, but I catch it. Then the practiced recovery kicks in. He sighs, rolling his shoulders like a weary provider. Long drive, he says, walking to the refrigerator to grab a bottle of water. Total false alarm. Hendricks completely overreacted. Just a faulty pressure gauge. So the pipeline is fine, then. Fine. All good. He flashes the smile again, but his eyes are darting around the kitchen. He is scanning the room, looking for a threat he cannot quite identify. The air feels too still to him. Your mom called me earlier, I say. My voice is perfectly flat. A smooth, featureless surface. The plastic water bottle in his hand crinkles sharply as his grip tightens. His jaw muscles lock. Oh yeah? He unscrews the cap, staring down at the counter. What did she want? Just checking in. Wanted to wish me a happy birthday. It is a lie. Opal did not call me back after hanging up. I know exactly what Opal is doing right now. She is calling her attorney. But I drop the bait just to watch how he handles the line. Archer visibly exhales. His shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. That was nice of her. He pulls his phone from his pocket. I watch his thumb fly across the glass screen. Swipe, tap, delete. He is clearing messages. Scrubbing the timeline. He sets the phone face down on the granite counter. I am going to take a shower, he says, already walking toward the hallway. Wash the road dirt off. I sit in the quiet kitchen. The water pipes shudder as the shower turns on upstairs. I look at the black rectangle of his phone sitting on the counter. I could walk over there. I could pick it up. He probably did not delete everything. I could find texts. I could find a name, but I do not move. Snooping through a spouse's phone is amateur hour. As a forensic accountant, I know exactly what happens to illegally obtained digital evidence when a lawyer challenges it in court. It gets thrown out. Text messages can be explained away. Photos can be excused. People lie. People manipulate. But money? Money never lies. Money leaves a trail. Money is cold, hard, and irrefutable. I pull my laptop from my work bag. I open it on the kitchen island. I navigate to our joint bank account portal. I am a joint account holder. I have the passwords. Every piece of data I am about to touch is completely, legally mine to view. I type in the password. The dashboard loads. I open a blank spreadsheet on my second monitor, and I begin to count. It is 2 in the morning on Sunday. Beck is asleep in his room down the hall. Archer is asleep in our bed, or at least pretending to be. I am sitting in the small spare room he likes to call my little nook. The house is completely silent, but the noise inside my head is deafening. I open my laptop and download 3 years of our joint bank statements. Part of me wants to find a simple explanation. A quiet voice, sounding exactly like my mother, whispers that maybe there is a misunderstanding. Maybe the business is real. Maybe I am jumping to conclusions. I lived with that whispering voice for 10 years, while my father emptied my mother's life savings. But then the cold water of my profession washes over the ghost of her hope. I audit construction firms for a living. I hunt for missing money. Numbers do not have opinions. Numbers do not care about your marriage. If they say a man is guilty, he is guilty. I begin the forensic workflow. Step 1 is identifying recurring payments. Step 2 is verifying vendor legitimacy. Step 3 is cross-referencing with known expenses. I scroll through the digital pages. A line item jumps out almost immediately. Meridian Advisory. The payments range from $5,200 to $5,800. every single month. The withdrawals started exactly 3 years ago in June. I run the total in a blank cell, $190,440. I open the Texas Secretary of State Public Records database. I type in the name of the LLC. The registered agent pops up on the bright white screen. Tanya Voss. A post office box in Katy, Texas. I know that name. Archer mentioned her once, years ago, waving away a college memory. Just my ex, Tanya. We were young and stupid. I remember seeing a picture in an old yearbook. Auburn hair. A wide, carefree smile. I remember looking at her face and thinking she was pretty, but he chose me. I stare at the six-figure sum glowing on my monitor. $190,440. He did not choose me. He chose both of us. My hands begin to tremble. It is the first time they have shaken since I stood by the giraffe enclosure at the zoo. I press my palms flat against the edge of the desk until the shaking stops. Then I grab the mouse. I do not stop working. I take a screenshot of the state records. I save the file with a clean, professional title. Joint Account Meridian Advisory, 3-year trace. I lock it into an encrypted folder, just like I do for Hargrove Construction every single day. For the next 3 days, I live 2 completely different lives. By day, I am the normal wife. I cook chicken and rice. I drive Beck to school. I answer Archer asking what we are having for dinner with a smiling emoji. By night, I am a financial investigator. From 11 until 3 in the morning, every single night, I sit in the dark and dismantle my marriage. The blue light of the laptop screen reflects on my face at 2 in the morning, casting long shadows against the walls of the office. My third cup of coffee sits on a coaster. It is completely cold, leaving a bitter, ashy coat on my tongue. Through the drywall, I can hear Archer snoring. It is a steady, unconcerned rhythm. The sound of a man sleeping deeply, believing his secrets are perfectly safe. My right hand moves the trackpad with mechanical precision, but my left pinky twitches every time a new discrepancy pops up on the screen. Monday night, I dig deeper into the shell company. Meridian Advisory was registered exactly 2 months before the payments from our joint account started. It has a professional setup with an employer identification number and a registered agent. But there is no website, no search results, no professional networking profile, no client list. It is a shell company. I flagged 3 of these for the corporate auditors at work last year. I know exactly what they look like. Tuesday night, I cross-reference the bank statements. The amounts vary slightly each month, mimicking a legitimate consulting retainer. But the numbers are never round. Legitimate retainers are flat fees, like $5,000 even. Unround numbers mean someone is calculating backward. He was figuring out exactly how much cash he could drain without triggering a low balance alert. I also noticed the dates. Every single transfer happens on the 7th of the month, the exact day a grace period for an apartment lease usually ends. Wednesday night, I pull the joint credit card statements. A new pattern emerges. Flowers by Elaine, $120. Every single month on the 14th. A Valentine pattern, repeated 12 times a year. I have never received monthly flowers from my husband. I sit back in my chair. $190,440 to Meridian, $120 a month for flowers. For 36 months. That is $4,320 in flowers alone. Enough money to fully fund a year of college contributions for Beck. I build a master spreadsheet. Column A is the date. Column B is the amount. Column C is the payee. Column D is the category. Legitimate, unknown, affair-related. I use the yellow fill tool for the affair expenses. After 3 nights of digging, 73% of our discretionary spending is glowing bright yellow. I close the laptop at exactly 3:17 on Wednesday morning. The final total sits burned into my retinas. $190,000 to the shell company, $4,000 for flowers, $12,600 for client dinners on our joint card instead of his corporate expense account, $207,360 over 3 years. I look down at the scratched glass face of my mother's watch. She died in a tiny studio apartment with $4,200 to her name. Archer handed his college girlfriend 50 times that amount. There is no more debate, no more whispering voices hoping for a misunderstanding. The point of no return has arrived. This is $207,000 worth of absolute certainty. I walk quietly into the master bedroom. Archer is facing the wall. The heavy scent of Dior Sauvage still lingers on his pillowcase. I lie down on my side of the bed and keep my eyes wide open in the dark. Tomorrow, I will call a lawyer. Not just a standard family lawyer. A forensic divorce attorney. I am going to get every single penny back. Thursday arrives. I use my lunch break at the Hargrove construction office to run a background profile on Tanya Voss. I do not touch my company desktop. I use my personal laptop and connect to my cellular hotspot. You never use company network resources for a personal investigation. That is rule number 1 in my line of work. I run the address registered to Meridian Advisory. It traces to a post office box. I pull public property records for Fort Bend County. Tanya Voss, age 38. She has an active lease at a luxury apartment complex in Sugar Land. I find her professional profile online. She lists herself as an independent marketing consultant, but the client roster is completely blank. I switch over to her public social media accounts. Her profile is unlocked. It is a curated grid of lifestyle photos, high-end restaurants, weekend trips, designer coffee cups resting on marble tables. There is no engagement ring, no tagged partner, but as I scroll back exactly 6 months, I stop on a picture of a patio table. 2 glasses of white wine catch the afternoon sun. The caption reads, Tuesday therapy, followed by a champagne glass emoji. I lean closer to the screen. In the curved reflection of the wine glass closest to the camera, there is a distorted image of a man's hand resting on the table. He is wearing a heavy, distinct titanium smartwatch, an Apple Watch Series Ultra. I zoom in until the pixels blur. It is the exact same model Archer wears, the one he told me he bought with his quarterly bonus. I pull up the photo the stranger sent me on my phone and set it next to the laptop screen. It is not the same restaurant. The patio chairs are different, but the style is identical. An outdoor patio, bright sunshine, expensive wine. This is a pattern. It was never a one-time mistake. This is 3 years of Tuesday therapy. I close my laptop and slide it into my leather bag. I pull up the Hargrove construction ledger on my desktop, a long column of numbers belonging to other people. But right now, every single digit I look at morphs into $5,400. Meridian Advisory. This month, next month, the month after that, 36 times. My lunch hour is over. I walk down the hall to the employee restroom. I turn on the cold water and wash my hands. The soap smells like cheap lavender. I look up at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My eyes are tired, with dark circles forming underneath, but they are completely clear. You are good at this, I whisper to the glass. You are the best they have. Now be good at it for yourself. I took Friday morning off from work and drove downtown. The law office of Dunn & Varga sat on the 12th floor of a quiet commercial building. It was not a flashy place. There were no marble columns or abstract paintings in the lobby. Renata Dunn had a practical office filled with heavy wooden bookshelves and framed diplomas. A single photograph sat on her desk, showing Renata and an older woman who shared her sharp jawline, her mother. Renata read my spreadsheet in complete silence. The only sound in the room was the soft clicking of her mouse as she scrolled through 36 months of highlighted transactions. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note above us. 4 minutes passed. I sat perfectly still in the dark leather guest chair, keeping my hands folded in my lap, waiting for the professional verdict. You did this yourself? Renata asked, finally looking up from my laptop screen. I am a forensic bookkeeper, I said. I can see that, Renata replied. She turned the laptop around so the screen faced me again. This is better than what most forensic accountants give me in formal discovery. How bad is it? Renata leaned back in her chair and picked up a silver pen. In Texas, everything earned during a marriage is considered community property. Your husband has been funneling community property to a shell company controlled by his former girlfriend for 3 years. That is legally called dissipation. The court will credit every single dollar back to your side of the ledger. She explained the law with clinical precision, and I listened the way I listened to project managers outlining construction budgets. Texas allowed fault-based divorce. Adultery was a solid ground for filing, and the financial dissipation gave the judge a reason to award a disproportionate share of the remaining assets. She also mentioned the state had a one-party consent rule for recordings, meaning I could legally document conversations without Archer knowing. I absorbed every word, filing the facts away like ledger entries. Does he have a company credit card? Renata asked, pointing the silver pen at my spreadsheet. Something separate from your joint accounts? I thought about the dark leather wallet Archer kept on his dresser. Yes, he has a corporate American Express card through Petrovex. He always says it is for client entertainment. We will subpoena those records in discovery, Renata said. If he used company money for personal affairs, that becomes a separate problem between him and his employer. I left her office an hour later, carrying a thick manila folder. The label on the front read Sadler vs. Sadler Strategy Memo. Inside was a checklist of 14 specific steps. Step 1. The forensic audit of joint accounts was already done. Step 2. Retaining a forensic accountant was checked off because I was my own expert. Step 3 was printed in bold letters. Do not reveal knowledge to the opposing party. I ran my thumb over those words before closing the folder, sealing the secret away. By late Saturday night, I was back in my home office. The rest of the house was entirely dark. I followed the digital paper trail deeper into the shell company. Using the state registry filings, I had the employer identification number for Meridian Advisory. I cross-referenced that number with the payee account routing data on our joint bank statements. It was a tedious, exhausting process, but patience was the one thing my profession demanded. I finally cracked the destination account. Meridian Advisory was not just holding the cash. The shell company was paying $2,800 a month in rent for a luxury condominium in Sugar Land. It was the exact same apartment complex where Tanya Voss listed her mailing address. The lease was under the corporate name, completely masking her involvement to a casual observer. It was a smart move, but it was not smart enough to hide from someone who hunted missing money for a living. I kept digging through the electronic records. There were utility bills for electricity and internet, all paid by Meridian. The rent and utilities added up to roughly $3,400 every month. That left anywhere from $1,800 to $2,400 unaccounted for. Cash transfers, gifts, groceries, a completely subsidized life. I highlighted 12 more rows on my spreadsheet. The monitor glowed with a sickening, bright yellow light in the dark room. The phone rang on Sunday afternoon. Archer was out golfing with his sales team, leaving me alone in the kitchen preparing lunch for Beck. The caller identification showed Opal. "Come over," Opal said the second I answered. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. Leave Beck with a friend. I dropped Beck off at a neighbor's house and drove out to Cypress. The April heat was already baking the asphalt, creating shimmering waves above the highway. Opal lived in a neat, modest ranch-style house at the end of a quiet street. The walls of her living room were covered in framed photographs, pictures of Archer as a little boy, pictures of Opal in her younger years. There was absolutely no trace of Floyd Sadler in the house. Opal had scrubbed her former husband from her history the day their divorce was finalized. She poured 2 glasses of iced sweet tea and set one on the wooden table in front of me. She did not sit down immediately. My mother-in-law stood by the kitchen counter, wiping down a spotless surface with a rag, channeling her nervous energy into the repetitive motion. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold tea. "I hired a lawyer," Opal said. I wrapped both hands around the cold glass. "For what?" "Exactly. That mortgage." Opal tossed the rag into the sink and turned to face me. "I guaranteed a $480,000 loan on one condition, and he knows exactly what that condition was. He broke it." "Can you legally withdraw your name from a mortgage?" I asked. "My lawyer says I can demand he refinance the house in his name only." Opal pulled a chair out and sat across from me. Her posture was perfectly straight, her shoulders squared like a soldier preparing for a long campaign. "If he cannot do that, and he absolutely cannot with his credit score after what I suspect he has been spending, the bank has the right to call the loan. He loses the house." My stomach dropped. The cold condensation from the glass seeped into my palms. If the bank called the loan and forced a foreclosure, Archer would lose the house. But Archer did not live there alone. "Opal," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden tightness in my throat. "That is our house too, mine and Beck's." Opal looked at me. A long, heavy silence settled over the kitchen. The ticking of a clock in the hallway seemed to echo against the walls. "I know," she finally said. "That is why I am telling you first." My lawyer explained the timing. "If you file for divorce and get the house in the settlement before I recall my signature, you will own the property. Once it is legally yours, I will sign as a guarantor for you. Just you." I stared at her. This woman was my mother-in-law, someone I had always kept at a polite, respectful distance. Now, she was offering to be my strongest ally. She was a woman who had sat exactly where I was sitting, 28 years ago, dealing with the exact same betrayal. "Why are you doing this?" I asked softly. "Because when Floyd did this to me, nobody warned me." Opal's voice cracked. It was a tiny fracture, the first time I had ever heard her lose her iron control. "Nobody helped me. I lost everything because I did not know, until it was entirely too late. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was dry and warm, grounding me in the reality of the moment. You are not going to be me, Jolene. The following week settled into a strange, breathless rhythm. Renata had filed the formal discovery requests, demanding the corporate American Express records from Archer's employer. She warned me the legal process would take weeks, caught up in the slow machinery of corporate compliance and opposing counsel delays. But I could not sit in my house and wait weeks for a piece of paper. The numbers were already crawling under my skin, demanding to be pulled into the light. I needed another way in. It was 1 a.m. on a Tuesday when the idea finally hit me. I was standing in the laundry room, folding a stack of white towels. The washing machine hummed a low, vibrating note against the linoleum floor. The small room smelled heavily of clean linen detergent, a scent that barely masked the faint, lingering trace of Archer's cologne clinging to the collar of a shirt tossed in the basket. I stopped folding. I looked at his pile of dry cleaning. For 12 years, I had been the one to empty his pockets before taking his suits to the cleaners. Every month, I would pull out crumpled gas station receipts, dry cleaning tickets, and restaurant tabs. I never actually read them. I just gathered the small scraps of thermal paper and tossed them into the top drawer of the utility cabinet, a junk drawer designated for pocket trash he might eventually need for his expense reports. He never cleaned that drawer out. I only opened it to add more paper. Trust is a heavy, thick blindfold. I had worn it comfortably for a decade. Standing in the fluorescent glare of the laundry room, I finally reached up and untied the knot. I pulled the utility drawer open. It was packed full. I grabbed a handful of receipts and carried them out to the kitchen island. The overhead pendant lights cast a bright, sterile glow across the granite counter. I started sorting. I threw away the gas station slips and the coffee shop purchases. I kept only the items printed on heavy thermal paper bearing the logos of high-end restaurants. 14 months of accumulated paper lay spread out before me. The ink on the older ones was already beginning to fade, turning a pale, ghostly blue against the white background. I smoothed out the creases with the edge of my thumb and began arranging them chronologically. A distinct pattern emerged within 10 minutes. The dinners happened every 2 weeks, falling predictably on a Tuesday or a Thursday. The locations were a rotating list of Houston's most expensive dining rooms: Pappas Brothers Steakhouse, Uchi, Underbelly. The total amounts ranged from $180 to $340 per meal. At the top of every single receipt, the guest count was clearly printed. 2 guests. I leaned closer, bracing my hands flat against the cold stone of the counter. Petrovex had a strict corporate expense policy. I knew this because Archer complained about it constantly. Any meal over $50 required the employee to physically write the name of the client on the merchant copy of the receipt before submitting the digital photograph to the accounting department. I looked at a receipt from a Tuesday night at Uchi. Archer's familiar, hurried handwriting was scrawled in blue ink across the bottom margin, right below the tip line. Client, T. Voss, Meridian Advisory. I stared at the letters. I moved to the next receipt, a Thursday night at Underbelly. The exact same notation sat at the bottom, T. Voss. I checked a third, a fourth, a fifth. Every single expensive dinner for 2 was neatly documented and expensed to his employer using the real name of his former girlfriend. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped my throat, echoing in the quiet kitchen. Archer was a sales director pulling in nearly $300,000 a year, yet he possessed the sheer arrogance to use his actual mistress's name on his corporate expense reports. He truly believed he was untouchable. He assumed no one in his corporate accounting department would ever bother to run a background check on a consultant, and he assumed his wife would never look in a laundry room drawer. It was the kind of careless, rookie mistake I saw first-year contractors make before getting fired for fraud. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the camera. I flattened the first receipt against the granite counter and took a clear, high-resolution photograph. I moved to the next one, framing the date, the amount, and his handwriting perfectly. The process took 20 minutes. When I finished, I counted the digital files. 28 receipts, $7,200 in romantic dinners, entirely funded by Petrovex Energy Services. The company would definitely want to see these. By late April, the collection of evidence had grown too large to keep isolated on a single laptop. I spent a Saturday evening locked in my home office, organizing everything I had gathered into a master file. I purchased a heavy-duty, encrypted flash drive specifically for this purpose. In the world of financial auditing, redundancy was not just a preference, It was a requirement for survival. I plugged the metal drive into the port and began building the architecture of my divorce. I created 7 distinct folders, labeling them with the cold, clinical precision of an autopsy report. Folder 1 became the joint account trace, holding the spreadsheet that tracked 36 months of payments to the shell company. Folder 2 held the state registration documents for Meridian Advisory, proving Tanya Voss was the registered agent. Folder 3 contained the apartment lease and utility payment traces for the condominium in Sugarland. Folder 4 housed the 28 photographs of the corporate American Express receipts. Folder 5 was a collection of social media screenshots, matching her public posts to the exact dates of the restaurant charges, including the reflection of his titanium watch. Folder 6 held the original photograph sent to me by the unknown number at the zoo. Finally, I created Folder 7, the master timeline. Every date, every dollar, every location, mapped out in a single, undeniable spreadsheet. I watched the blue progress bar fill the screen as the files transferred over to the encrypted drive. When it finished, I ejected the device and held it in the palm of my hand. The metal casing felt cool and heavy against my skin. $207,000 of betrayal, condensed into 3 inches of plastic and steel. The following Monday morning, I took the flash drive to the Hargrove construction office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my metal desk, dropped the drive into a small steel lockbox I kept for confidential vendor contracts, and spun the combination dial. Rule number 1 in my profession dictated that critical evidence belonged in neutral territory, far away from the subject of the investigation. I sat back in my desk chair and opened my personal email on my laptop. I sent a secure link containing a copy of the files to Renata. Her response arrived less than an hour later. It was 3 simple sentences. This is the cleanest dissipation file I have seen in 11 years. When we get to the discovery phase, his lawyer will not know what hit them. Good work, Jolene. I read the email twice. I felt a sudden, fierce spike of professional pride. I was incredibly good at my job. I had built an airtight case that would completely destroy Archer's financial defenses. But as quickly as the satisfaction arrived, a heavy, suffocating wave of grief rushed in to replace it. I looked away from the monitor and stared out the window of my office, watching the traffic crawl along the Houston highway. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every expensive steakhouse booking represented a night I had spent alone. I thought about the hundreds of evenings I had stood in our kitchen, carefully wrapping a plate of dinner in aluminum foil, keeping it warm in the oven because he texted me to say he was stuck at the office. I remembered the smell of roasted chicken drying out under the heat while I helped Beck with his spelling homework. While my dinner turned to ash, Archer was sitting across from Tanya Voss, drinking expensive wine and writing her name on a company tab. 36 months of cooking for 2 people, while only 1 person ever came home to eat. The grief sat heavy in my chest, a physical weight pressing against my ribs. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I could not afford right now. I just closed the email, opened a new construction ledger, and forced myself to go back to work. The missing piece of the puzzle arrived completely unannounced. It was Monday, April 28th. I was using my lunch break to run an errand, sitting in the driver's seat of my SUV in the Hargrove parking lot. The Texas spring heat was already aggressive, baking the metal roof of the car and turning the leather steering wheel warm under my hands. I had the windows rolled up and the air conditioning running on high, trying to cool down before heading back inside the building. My phone vibrated violently against the plastic cup holder. I picked it up and looked at the screen. The caller identification displayed a standard Houston area code, but no name. It was a number I did not have saved in my contacts, but my forensic memory immediately recognized the sequence of digits. It was the exact same number that had sent the photograph of Archer and Tanya on my birthday. My heart rate spiked, hammering a rapid rhythm against my ribs. A sudden rush of adrenaline made my fingers feel slightly numb. I took a deep breath, forcing the air down into my lungs, and swiped my thumb across the green icon. I lifted the phone to my ear. Mrs. Sadler? The voice belonged to a man. It was deep, a little rough around the edges, carrying a thick, working-class Texas drawl. It was not the polished, corporate voice of the men Archer worked with. Who is this? I kept my tone perfectly level, betraying absolutely none of the panic vibrating through my hands. My name is Nash Kittrell, the man said. I am the one who sent you that photograph. Complete silence filled the interior of my car. The only sound was the rush of cold air blowing from the dashboard vents. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, my fingernails biting into the leather wrapping. Why? I asked. Nash let out a slow, heavy breath. Because Tanya Voss is my former wife, and your husband is the reason she left me. I closed my eyes. The final column clicked into place. I was not the only casualty in this ledger. There was collateral damage on the other side of the equation. How did you get my personal cell phone number? I asked, keeping my focus entirely on the facts. Tanya had Archer's phone on speaker one afternoon, Nash explained, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of old exhaustion. This was a few months ago, when I went over to our old apartment to pick up the last of my tools from the garage. He was talking to her, and he said your name out loud, Jolene Sadler. I remembered it. When I saw them together at the restaurant, I went home and searched your name online. You are listed on the staff directory page for Hargrove Construction. The company website had your direct contact information. I processed the information, sorting the timeline in my head. How long were you and Tanya married? 6 years, Nash said. She walked out on me 2 years ago. She packed her bags and told me we just wanted different things out of life. Different things meaning my husband. I did not know for sure until I saw them sitting at Bella Vista, Nash admitted. His voice tightened, the rough edges growing sharper. But I suspected something was entirely wrong. During the last year of our marriage, Tanya started upgrading everything. She came home with new clothes, expensive designer bags, talking about restaurants I knew we could not afford. She was working as a freelance marketing consultant, but her income never matched her lifestyle. The math simply did not work. You did not trace the money? I asked, the auditor in me genuinely curious. I am an electrical foreman, Mrs. Sadler, Nash replied softly. I wire commercial buildings for a living. I do not know how to read spreadsheets or track shell companies. I leaned my head back against the headrest, staring up at the fabric ceiling of the SUV. We were two completely different people, living in different worlds, tied together by the exact same betrayal. He wired buildings. I audited ledgers. And both of us had completely missed the fire burning inside our own homes. You saw them at the restaurant, I said, steering the conversation back to the evidence. 3 weeks ago. Yes, ma'am. I was driving a company truck down Montrose, heading to a job site. I got stuck at a red light right in front of the patio. I looked over, and there she was, sitting in the sun, holding his hand. Nash paused, and I could hear the faint sound of traffic moving in the background on his end of the line. I pulled the truck over into a side street. I sat there watching them for 20 minutes. I took the picture from the cab of my truck. Why did you wait? I asked. The question had been burning in the back of my mind since the moment the photo arrived on my birthday. You took the picture 3 weeks ago. Why did you wait until the 12th of April to send it? I did not know it was your birthday, Nash said immediately, the regret clear and heavy in his tone. I swear to you, I had no idea. I waited 3 weeks because I did not know if it was my place to get involved. I kept telling myself it was none of my business anymore. She was gone. Let it go. But you sent it anyway. Yeah, Nash said quietly. I did. Because I spent those 3 weeks thinking about the day I finally figured out my marriage was a lie. I remembered how stupid I felt, how completely blind. Another long pause settled between us. I sent it because I wished someone had told me sooner. Nobody warned me. You deserve to know. The words echoed the exact sentiment Opal had expressed in her kitchen in Cyprus. Nobody warned me. Two strangers, separated by decades and circumstances, both stepping forward because they refused to let another woman walk blindly into a wall. Mr. Kittrell, I said, sitting up straight in my seat. The cold professionalism washed over me, pushing the grief aside. I have a lot of questions. I figured you might, Nash replied. I get off work at 5. I have time whenever you do. I pulled my vehicle into the gravel parking lot of a diner just off Interstate 10 in Katy. It was Wednesday evening, exactly 7 o'clock. I had dropped Beck off with a reliable teenage babysitter an hour earlier. Archer had sent a brief text message at 4 that afternoon claiming he was working late to close a massive quarter-end deal. I did not ask him where he was going. I already knew he was not anywhere near the corporate office. The diner was a relic from an older version of Texas. A neon Budweiser sign flickered a weak red glow through the front window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The interior smelled intensely of frying bacon, old grease, and coffee that had been sitting on a heating pad for far too many hours. I spotted him immediately in a corner booth. Nash Kittrell did not look like anyone who belonged in my polished, corporate suburban life. He was a stocky man with broad shoulders beneath a faded flannel shirt. A thick layer of dark stubble covered his jaw. He was staring down at a heavy white ceramic coffee mug, both hands wrapped around the porcelain. They were the hands of a man who worked for a living, calloused, thick, with grease permanently worked into the creases of his knuckles. He was the absolute opposite of my husband. There was nothing flashy about him. No manicured fingernails, no expensive watch, no charming smile carefully designed to disarm a client. He just looked tired and entirely honest. I walked over and slid into the vinyl booth across from him. The material squeaked loudly under my weight. Nash looked up. His eyes were dark and steady. He pushed a plastic menu toward me, but I shook my head. "How long were you and Tanya married?" I asked, skipping the polite introductions. We did not need them. We were already bound together by the worst kind of intimacy. Nash looked back down at his coffee. 6 years. She packed her bags and left 2 years ago. She stood right in our kitchen and told me we just wanted different things out of life. And by different things, she meant my husband. I did not know for sure until I saw them sitting together at Bella Vista last month, Nash said. His voice was low, carrying a deep, gravelly tone that barely masked his lingering exhaustion. But I suspected something was entirely wrong long before she walked out. During the last year of our marriage, Tanya started upgrading her life. She came home with new clothes, expensive designer bags, talking about upscale restaurants I knew we could absolutely not afford. She told me her freelance marketing business was taking off. You did not trace the money? I asked the question automatically, my forensic brain struggling to understand how a massive financial shift could go unnoticed in a shared household. Nash offered a small, sad smile. I am an electrical foreman, Mrs. Sadler. I wire commercial buildings for a living. I pull copper cables through drywall. I do not know how to read financial spreadsheets or track corporate shell companies. He reached into the front pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a thick stack of folded paper. He laid it flat on the scratched Formica table and pushed it toward me. When she left, she did not bother to take her name off our shared cellular plan, Nash explained. I am the primary account holder. I cannot read her text messages or listen to her voicemails, but I have complete legal access to the billing records and the call logs. I printed the last 12 months. I picked up the top sheet. Lines of data filled the page. I recognized Archer's personal cell phone number immediately. It appeared 4, sometimes 6 times a day. I ran my finger down the duration column. 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. The average call length was 22 minutes, usually occurring right around noon or during Archer's evening commute home. There is something else, Nash said quietly. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it around for me to see. It was a photograph of a cardboard shoebox sitting on a concrete garage floor. Inside the box was a disorganized pile of greeting cards. When she moved out of our apartment, she left a few boxes of junk in the garage, Nash told me. I never threw them away. After I saw the two of you tagged in a picture on social media, I remembered that box. I went out there and opened it. He swiped to the next photograph. The image zoomed in on a single card resting on top of the pile. My breath caught in my throat. The air suddenly felt too thick to inhale. It was a generic Hallmark birthday card, a picture of a cake on the front. I recognized it instantly, because the exact same card was currently sitting in the junk drawer in my kitchen. But it was not the printed design that made my chest ache. It was the hurried, sloppy handwriting scrawled across the bottom of the white paper. Happy birthday, babe A. I stared at the glowing screen. The ink was black. The slant of the letter A was identical. Archer had not just purchased the same generic card for both of us. He had written the exact same hollow sentence. He had essentially copied and pasted his affection, distributing it with the careless efficiency of a man, completely devoid of genuine feeling. A new kind of grief hit me right then, striking far deeper than the initial shock of the betrayal. The financial theft was a calculated crime. The expensive dinners were a predictable cliché. But buying 2 identical greeting cards and signing them with a single letter was an act of profound laziness. Archer was not a man torn between 2 passionate, consuming loves. He was a man managing 2 separate households because it was simply convenient for his ego. I was not unique to him. I was an administrative task. I pushed the phone back across the table. My hands were perfectly still. The sadness retreated, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity that settled into my bones like winter frost. Thank you, Mr. Kittrell, I said softly. I am sorry, Nash replied, sliding the phone back into his pocket. I know how much that hurts. 2 days later, on Friday morning, my cell phone rang while I was sitting at my desk at Hargrove Construction. It was Renata Dunn. She did not bother with a greeting. She simply told me to come down to her office immediately and classified the request as urgent. I arrived at the law firm just before 10 o'clock. The receptionist pointed me straight down the hallway. When I stepped into Renata's office, she did something she had never done during our previous 3 consultations. She walked over to the heavy wooden door and pulled it firmly shut until the latch clicked into place, sealing us off from the rest of the firm. I looked at her desk. Renata was a woman who practically worshipped order. Her workspace was usually a pristine surface of polished mahogany. Today, it was a landscape of absolute chaos. 4 thick manila folders lay open, pages spilling over the edges. Yellow sticky notes clung to the edges of her computer monitor. A highlighter cap rested abandoned on the patterned carpet near her chair. She was not holding her usual ceramic mug of black coffee. She was holding a tall glass of ice water, gripping it tight enough to turn her knuckles pale. She took a slow sip, swallowed, and set the glass down on a coaster. She needed a completely clear head. Right in the center of the desk sat a bright red file folder. The label on the tab was handwritten in thick black marker. Sadler Critical. My private investigator found something, Renata said. Her jaw was tight, the muscles jumping slightly under her skin. Her dark eyes were sharp and entirely devoid of their usual professional warmth. I need you to sit down in that chair, Jolene. I am sitting, I replied, though I could barely feel the leather beneath me. Right. Okay. Renata placed her hands flat on either side of the red folder. We ran a comprehensive public records search on Tanya Voss. It is standard procedure in divorce preparation. We check the Department of Motor Vehicles, property deeds, tax liens, and general civil court records. We also pull security parking logs from public facilities when we need to establish a timeline. And? My voice sounded completely hollow in the quiet room. Harris County records show that Tanya Voss has visited an obstetrician at Texas Women's Hospital 8 separate times in the past 4 months, Renata said, keeping her eyes locked on mine. The parking lot security camera logs, which we acquired through a standard public records request, show Archer's vehicle entering and exiting that specific parking structure for 3 of those appointments. My mouth opened. No sound came out. I closed it, swallowed dry air, and opened it again. The polished mahogany walls of the office seemed to lean inward, pressing the oxygen out of the space. She is pregnant, Renata stated, removing any remaining shred of ambiguity. She is 4 months along, based on the frequency and timing of the medical appointments. I sat perfectly frozen in the leather chair. My mind scrambled, trying to find a place to put this massive, immovable piece of data. There is more, Renata continued, her voice dropping to a softer, more careful register. She opened the red folder and slid a printed document across the desk toward me. Your source, Nash Kittrell, forwarded this to my office late last night. When Tanya moved out of their shared apartment 2 years ago, she abandoned an old iPad. She left it plugged into a wall outlet in a spare room. It was connected to his home wireless network, and she never bothered to sign out of her cloud account. Nash never touched it, but after he saw them together at the restaurant, he opened the device. I looked down at the paper. It was a printed copy of an electronic mail message. The sender was Tanya. The recipient was Archer's personal address. The date stamp was from 3 weeks ago. The baby is healthy. The 16-week scan was completely perfect. When are you going to tell Jo? You promised you would tell her by the beginning of summer. I read the words 3 times. The letters blurred and sharpened again. When are you going to tell Jo? Tanya knew exactly who I was. Tanya was actively waiting for Archer to leave his wife. This was not a hidden affair happening in the shadows of his real life. Tanya firmly believed she was the transition plan. She thought she was the official successor. Archer was running 2 parallel families simultaneously, and he had convinced his former girlfriend that her household was the one that would survive. She also signed a new property lease last week, Renata said, sliding another page across the desk. She upgraded from the 1-bedroom apartment in Sugar Land. She is now renting a 3-bedroom condominium in Cinco Ranch. The monthly rent is $3,800. It is being paid directly by Meridian Advisory. She is setting up a nursery, Jolene. I stared at the leasing document. The numbers floated off the page, rearranging themselves in my mind. What does this change legally? I asked. My voice did not shake. The forensic accountant had completely taken over the controls. The wife was locked away somewhere deep inside, screaming in the dark, but the auditor was sitting in the chair, ready to balance the ledger. Legally, it changes everything and nothing, Renata explained. leaning forward and resting her forearms on the desk. The adultery is already completely proven. The pregnancy is just a massive exclamation point for the judge. But financially, the landscape just shifted violently. Archer is no longer just funding a mistress. He is actively building a second permanent household using your community property, the luxury condominium upgrade, the expensive medical visits, the nursery furniture. Every single dollar is classified as dissipation of marital assets. Renata paused, letting the silence stretch out to ensure I absorbed her next point. Furthermore, she said, her voice turning completely ruthless, when this child is born, Archer will owe state-mandated child support to Tanya. Because he earns a high salary, that monthly obligation will be substantial, and that money will be pulled directly from the exact same financial pot that is supposed to support your son. The final piece of the equation slammed into place. He is not just stealing from me, I whispered, the realization sending a spike of pure, crystalline anger straight through my spine. He is stealing from Beck. Exactly, Renata said, tapping the red folder with her index finger. And that is exactly the story I am going to tell the family court judge. Renata did not wait for me to process the grief. She immediately shifted into a higher gear, outlining a completely recalibrated legal strategy. The original plan of a standard fault-based divorce filing was gone. We were moving into aggressive, scorched earth litigation. We file the official paperwork on Monday, May the 5th, Renata instructed, her tone brisk and commanding. We file on the grounds of adultery. Simultaneously, I will file an emergency request for a temporary restraining order. This is a standard procedure in Texas high-asset cases. The moment the judge signs that order, every single financial asset in your marriage is legally frozen. He will not be able to move a dime out of your joint accounts, and he will not be able to funnel another cent into Meridian Advisory without risking severe contempt of court charges. He will know I found out, I said. He will know you are divorcing him, Renata corrected me, a sharp smile appearing on her face. He will have absolutely no idea how much data you have actually gathered. The formal discovery process is going to be a terrible surprise party for him. What about Opal? I asked, remembering the conversation in the kitchen in Cyprus. What about the mortgage? That remains a separate legal action managed by her attorney, Renata said, making a quick note on a yellow pad. But the sequence of events is highly critical. If Opal recalls the loan guarantee before you are awarded the house in the divorce settlement, you and Beck could end up completely homeless. If she fires that weapon after you secure the property, you keep the house safely in your name. I am coordinating the timeline directly with her lawyer. We are holding the mortgage recall as our ultimate leverage. We will drop that bomb right in the middle of his deposition. I left the law firm an hour later and walked out into the suffocating midday heat. I climbed into my SUV, started the engine, and turned the air conditioning off. I rolled all 4 windows down. The Houston air was 88 degrees and impossibly thick with humidity, smelling of hot concrete and vehicle exhaust. I needed the heat. I needed to feel something uncomfortable and real against my skin to prove I was still awake. I pulled out of the parking garage and drove toward the highway, letting the loud, rushing wind fill the cabin of the car. I started doing the math out loud, shouting the numbers over the roar of the wind. $190,000 funneled through the shell company. $7,200 spent on corporate steakhouse dinners. $4,320 spent on monthly romantic flowers. The massive upgrade to the luxury condominium lease. The total sum was rapidly approaching $230,000. And a baby, a new life, funded entirely by the labor of my marriage. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make my joints ache. The worn leather band of the cheap Timex watch rubbed against the skin of my left wrist. The steady, relentless ticking of the second hand felt like a drumbeat vibrating through my arm. I thought about my mother. I thought about Loretta, sitting on the faded linoleum floor of a cramped studio apartment, entirely surrounded by confusing legal documents she did not know how to read. She had trusted a man to handle the numbers, and she had died with exactly $4,200 left in her bank account. She had never known the truth until the final papers arrived in the mail, completely stripped of her dignity and her security. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I stared straight ahead at the long, flat stretch of Texas highway. "I know everything now, Mom," I whispered into the rushing air, the words completely swallowed by the sound of the road. "And I know how to count." At exactly 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon, the process server walked into the glass lobby of Petrovex Energy Services. I knew the exact minute because Renata's paralegal sent me a secure text confirmation at 2:07. The legal documents had been placed directly into Archer's hands. I sat at the kitchen island in my empty house. Beck was at his after-school program until 5 o'clock. I had nothing to do but wait. The silence stretched out. From 2:07 until 3:41, my phone sat completely still on the granite counter. He was not calling to yell. He was not texting to apologize. For 94 minutes, he was scrambling. He was calling an attorney, or calling Tanya, or searching the internet trying to figure out how much financial trouble he was actually in. At 3:41, the screen finally lit up. "We need to talk. Coming home." There were no emojis. There was no casual greeting. I put my laptop away. I made sure the encrypted flash drive was safely locked in my desk at Hargrove Construction. There was absolutely nothing incriminating left in the house. I poured myself a glass of ice water and waited in the quiet kitchen. Archer walked through the door from the garage just before 5. His face was flushed, dark red. His expensive silk tie was loosened, hanging crookedly against his collar. He gripped a rolled bundle of thick legal papers in his right hand. "What the hell is this, Jolene?" His voice was loud, bouncing harshly off the kitchen cabinets. "Those are divorce papers," I said, not moving from my stool. "I assume you can read them." "Adultery?" He unrolled the papers and slapped them flat against the counter. "Are you serious right now? Who told you this nonsense?" "The numbers told me." "Archer," I replied calmly. $190,440 transferred to Meridian Advisory. The registered agent is Tanya Voss. I watched his face. For a fraction of a second, his eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated shock. Then his jaw set as his mind furiously calculated the damage. A moment later, his shoulders dropped, and he pivoted directly back to his familiar, charming persona. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice low and soothing. "Meridian is a legitimate consulting firm. I hired them for some personal business development. A consulting firm with no website, no clients, and no revenue," I stated flatly. "A firm that pays $3,800 a month in rent for a luxury condominium in Cinco Ranch, where your pregnant former girlfriend currently lives." All the color drained completely out of Archer's face. He stared at me, the silence hanging heavy and toxic in the kitchen. He finally realized I knew everything. I did not have a vague suspicion. I had the math. By 7 o'clock that evening, the atmosphere inside the house felt like the aftermath of a localized nuclear strike. I had prepared dinner for Beck earlier, and he was safely tucked away in the game room with his noise-canceling headphones on. Archer and I sat in the living room. The heavy curtains were drawn shut against the fading daylight, and the lamps were dimmed. The faint smell of his Dior Sauvage cologne drifted across the space. It was fading after a long day at the office, but it was still present in the air. I knew I would hate that specific scent for the rest of my life. The large wall clock ticked in the background, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Archer sat on the leather sofa. He sat with his legs spread wide, resting his elbows on his knees, taking up as much physical space as possible. It was a calculated posture designed to project unbothered authority. I sat in the armchair opposite him, keeping my knees together and my hands folded neatly in my lap, completely controlled. He had spent the last 2 hours preparing his defense strategy. "I really did not want it to come to this," Archer said softly. He let out a heavy sigh, trying to sound deeply wounded. "You have been so distant, Jolene. For years. I come home from working a 12-hour day, and you are locked in your little nook with your spreadsheets. We never talk. We do not connect." "Do not," I said. It was 2 words, delivered completely flat. "Do not do that." "Do what?" he asked, feigning total innocence. "Do not rearrange the story so I become the reason you spent nearly $200,000 on another woman." "It is not that simple," he argued, his tone patronizing. "It is exactly that simple. $5,400 a month, for 36 months. That is our money, Archer. That is community property." The Wounded Victim Act vanished. The shift was immediate. His voice hardened, dropping a full octave. "And who gave you the right to go digging through our finances behind my back?" he demanded, leaning forward. "That is a massive violation of trust, Jolene." "I am a forensic bookkeeper," I reminded him. "It is literally what I do for a living." Archer began to escalate the situation. He threatened to fight for full custody of Beck, reminding me loudly that he made 3 times my salary. He threatened to claim my obsessive work habits made me an unfit mother. He promised to drag the legal proceedings out for years, draining every single asset we had to pay expensive attorney fees. I did not react. I sat perfectly still and let him talk. Renata had prepared me for every single one of these threats. High-earning men caught in lies always pulled from the exact same playbook. He would never get full custody, and Texas courts did not punish mothers for discovering financial fraud. Then Archer played his final card. It was the one threat I had not anticipated. "If you actually go through with this," he said, his eyes narrowing, "I will personally make sure Petrovex knows you illegally accessed my corporate expense information. That is corporate espionage. They will call your boss at Hargrove Construction, and they will fire you." My heart stopped. The blood rushed completely out of my head. I had not hacked his corporate email. I had not breached the Petrovex servers. I had found physical receipts in a jacket pocket inside my own laundry room. But Archer did not know that. He assumed I had used my computer skills to break into his company network, and his assumption meant he was absolutely terrified of what the official Petrovex records would show when Renata legally subpoenaed them. "I never touched your company systems, Archer," I said, keeping my breathing perfectly even. "I found your crumpled receipts in your jacket pocket, in our laundry room, inside our shared house." Archer blinked. He stared at me, his mind desperately trying to recalculate his exposed position. "But thank you," I added quietly. "Thank you for confirming there is something in the Petrovex records worth hiding." He stood up violently. He did not say another word. He walked out of the living room, marched down the hallway, and slammed the front door shut behind him. A minute later, the engine of his car roared to life, and he drove away into the dark. I did not bother checking the tracking application on my phone. I knew exactly whose house he was driving to. Beck appeared in the doorway of the living room a few minutes later, his headphones resting loosely around his neck. "Mom?" Beck asked, looking toward the front door. "Where is Dad going?" I held my arms out. He walked over and let me pull him into a tight hug. "He went out, baby," I whispered into his hair. He was 8 years old, but he was already entirely fluent in the heavy language of things we did not say out loud. By Wednesday, the counterattack had officially begun. Archer hired Grady Pruitt, an aggressive and notoriously expensive attorney known throughout Houston for defending wealthy husbands. Pruitt wasted no time. He immediately filed a motion challenging the dissipation claim, arguing Meridian Advisory was a legitimate business entity, and the payments were consulting fees for Archer's independent side ventures. He filed a second motion demanding temporary spousal support, claiming my divorce filing created a hostile home environment that forced Archer to rent separate accommodations. It was an astonishing display of absolute arrogance, considering Archer already had a fully furnished luxury condominium waiting for him in Cinco Ranch. Finally, Pruitt filed a counterclaim citing emotional neglect, arguing my obsessive work habits contributed to the breakdown of the marriage. I sat on the phone with Renata in my home office, listening to her break down the filings. "It is the standard playbook," Renata explained, sounding completely unbothered. "Every lawyer defending a high-earning cheater does this. The first motion will fail because Meridian has no actual clients and no revenue. The second motion is laughable, and the judge will see straight through it. The third motion is just noise. Emotional neglect is not a valid defense in Texas when adultery is proven with a paper trail. Then what are we worried about?" I asked. "I am worried about his fourth filing," Renata said, her tone shifting to something much more serious. "Pruitt just filed a subpoena demanding access to your work computer at Hargrove Construction. He is claiming you used your employer's resources and proprietary software to illegally investigate your husband." The air left my lungs. If Margaret Hargrove thought I was using company time and company equipment for a personal vendetta, she could fire me immediately. It was a massive liability for any construction firm. I had meticulously used my personal laptop and a cellular hotspot, but Pruitt was going to make it look like corporate theft. He was directly targeting the one thing I had built for myself. "I need to hang up," I told Renata. "I need to go tell my boss. Right now, before Pruitt gets there first." I walked into Margaret Hargrove's office on Thursday morning. Margaret was 62 years old. She had built the construction company from absolutely nothing alongside her late husband. I had worked for her for 9 years, and she knew I was the most thorough forensic bookkeeper in the Houston construction industry. Her office was a testament to decades of hard work. Heavy rolls of blueprints lined the wooden shelves. A scuffed yellow hard hat hung on a brass hook by the door. Framed family photos sat on her credenza, showing a lifetime of memories with a man who had adored her. I stood in front of her desk, keeping my hands tightly clasped together. Through the large window behind her, I could see the Houston skyline dotted with massive construction cranes. The entire world was building things, while my world was rapidly decaying. Margaret's desk was entirely clear, except for a reading glasses case, a single black pen, and a yellow notepad. She was a woman of brutal efficiency. "Margaret," I began, my voice wavering slightly before I forced it steady. "I need to tell you something before you hear it from a lawyer." She removed her reading glasses and set them carefully on the desk. "Sit down, Jolene." I sat in the leather guest chair and explained everything. I told her about the divorce, the shell company, and the fact that my husband's attorney was preparing to subpoena my work computer. I looked her directly in the eyes and swore I had never used company resources. I had used my personal laptop, a personal internet connection, and I had only conducted my searches during my lunch breaks or late at night. "Can you prove that to a judge?" Margaret asked quietly. "Every search I executed has a digital timestamp," I explained. "The logs on my personal laptop confirm it. I never once opened a personal browser window on the Hargrove network." Margaret studied my face for a long, heavy moment. The silence stretched out, thick with the weight of my 9-year career. "I have known you for 9 years, Joe," Margaret finally said. "You audit $40 million contracts for me, and you have never missed a single decimal point. If you sit in that chair and tell me you did not use company resources, I believe you." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 days. "If his lawyer sends a subpoena, we will comply," Margaret continued, picking her pen back up. "We have to follow the law, but I am going to instruct our information technology team to prepare the internal network logs. We will provide the exact records that show your company machine was completely clean during the relevant period. We protect our people here." "Thank you," I whispered. Margaret leaned forward, resting her arms on the desk. "Jolene, this man you married, he sounds exactly like 3 different subcontractors I have fired over the years. They are men who genuinely believe their personal charm is an acceptable substitute for basic integrity." She paused, glancing back at the photograph of her late husband. "My husband Harold was the most honest man I ever knew. He died 5 years ago, and I thank God every single day that in 40 years of marriage, I never once had to question where he was." I left her office and walked out to the employee parking lot. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car and closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet cabin. The relief from Margaret's unwavering support slammed violently into the crushing weight of everything else. I rested my forehead against the top of the steering wheel. The cold metal of the steering column seeped into my skin. Archer had not just betrayed our marriage. He was now actively threatening my career. He was attacking the one safe place I had built specifically to avoid ending up like my mother. Beneath the hot, burning anger, the deep well of grief finally cracked open. I turned my wrist and looked at the scratched face of the Timex watch. I thought about Loretta, sitting on the faded kitchen floor, completely surrounded by court papers she did not understand. My mother did not have a Margaret Hargrove. She did not have a Renata Dunn. She did not have evidence, or financial skills, or powerful allies. My mother had absolutely nothing. "I have everything you did not have, Mom," I whispered into the empty car, my voice finally breaking, "and I am still so scared." My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I picked it up and wiped my eyes. It was a text message from Nash. "Tanya is moving into the new condominium this weekend. Cinco Ranch. Do you want the address?" I stared at the glowing words. Tanya was moving into a 3-bedroom home. She was setting up a nursery for a new baby, using money pulled directly from my family. Meanwhile, my own son was sitting in his bedroom, wondering why his father never had time to come to his baseball games. I placed my thumbs on the digital keyboard. "Yes," I typed. "Send it." It was 6:30 on Saturday morning when I pulled through the tall iron gates of Forest Park Lawndale Cemetery. The Houston air was heavy with a pale morning fog, and the thick grass was still wet from a brief overnight rain. The moisture soaked completely through the canvas of my sneakers as I walked the familiar path toward Section 7, Row 14, Lot 22. I knew the exact location by the numbers, because everything in my life eventually reduced down to numbers. A loud, insistent Texas mockingbird called out from the branches of a nearby oak tree, shattering the quiet dampness of the graveyard. I stopped in front of a small, flat granite headstone. Loretta Mae Pruitt, 1963 to 2021. A small bouquet of plastic yellow flowers sat next to the marker. The petals were faded white at the edges from the brutal Texas sun. I made a mental note to buy a fresh arrangement before the end of the month. I sat down right on the wet grass. The cold dampness seeped into my jeans, but I did not care. I looked down at the cheap Timex watch strapped to my left wrist. The scratched glass face caught a weak ray of early morning sunlight breaking through the fog. My mother had worn this exact watch every single day. She bought it at a discount store for $35 during the week my father packed his bags and moved out. She did not wear a cheap watch because she lacked taste. She wore it because my father had quietly emptied every single joint account they shared before the divorce papers ever arrived in the mail. My mother had never known he was hiding money. She had never known about the receptionist he was moving in with. She had trusted a man to handle the household finances, handing over complete control because she believed marriage meant absolute faith. She died in a cramped studio apartment, measuring exactly 580 square feet, leaving behind a bank account containing exactly $4,200. I am 37 years old. I am the exact same age my mother was when her husband walked out the door. I had sworn to myself, standing over this very grave, that I would never repeat her life, and yet I had followed her exact pattern. I had married a charming man, I had focused on raising my son, and I had handed over the invisible reins of my own security. But as I sat on the wet grass, tracing the carved letters of her name, the difference finally crystallized in my mind. My mother did not know. I did. I had the raw data. She had no one to guide her. I had Renata Dunn. My mother had died with $4,200. Archer had just handed a pregnant mistress 50 times that amount. I had come to the cemetery looking for permission to be angry, searching for a way to justify burning Archer's life to the ground. But sitting in the cold morning air, I realized true revenge had absolutely nothing to do with making him suffer. True revenge was making sure I never ended up like Loretta Mae Pruitt. Revenge was taking absolute, permanent control of my own money, my own house, and my own future. I stood up and brushed the wet blades of grass off my legs. I am not going to die with $4,200, Mom, I whispered into the quiet air. I promise you. I pressed my hand against the cold, rough surface of the granite headstone. The frayed leather band of the Timex watch brushed against the rock. The watch had outlasted her marriage. It had outlasted her life. Now, it was going to outlast Archer. I walked back to my car, started the engine, and picked up my phone. I dialed Renata's number. She answered on the second ring, despite it being a Saturday morning. Renata, I said, putting the car in gear. When this divorce is finalized, I want to open my own independent forensic bookkeeping practice. Is that financially possible with the projected settlement? With the disproportionate share of assets you are getting? Renata replied smoothly. It is more than possible. It is guaranteed. Then let us finish this. On Monday morning, I sat in the plush leather chair in Renata's office. A heavy black speakerphone sat in the center of the polished mahogany desk. The blue light on the device indicated 2 separate callers were active on the line. Nash Kittrell was on his lunch break at a construction site, and Cynthia Vale, the attorney representing Opal Sadler, was calling from her office in Cyprus. We were building a trap with 4 distinct, inescapable walls. Let us review the sequence of events, Renata instructed, leaning over her notepad. Jolene's divorce filing demands a 62% disproportionate share of the community property, entirely based on the proven adultery and the financial dissipation. We are crediting the $230,000 Archer spent on Tanya Voss directly back to Jolene's side of the ledger. We are also demanding primary physical custody of Beck and exclusive ownership of the primary residence. Which brings us to the mortgage. Cynthia's voice crackled slightly over the speakerphone. My client, Opal Sadler, is prepared to execute her right as the financial guarantor. She will formally demand that Archer completely refinance the $480,000 loan in his name only. If he cannot secure that financing within 90 days, the bank will call the note due, forcing a foreclosure. When exactly do you want to serve him with that demand? Renata asked. I want to walk into the room and hand it to him personally during his official deposition, Cynthia replied. The satisfaction in her tone was undeniable. I want him trapped in a chair when he realizes his mother has completely cut him off. That is excellent timing, Renata agreed. Because right around the time of the deposition, the corporate American Express records will arrive via subpoena. I intend to forward those 28 romantic dinner receipts directly to the Human Resources Department at Petrovex Energy Services as a professional courtesy. Once they conduct an internal audit, Archer will be terminated for cause due to expense fraud. He will lose his corporate income instantly. I looked out the window. If Archer lost his salary, he would have absolutely zero ability to refinance a $500,000 house. Opal's demand would become a fatal blow. He would have to surrender the property to me in the divorce settlement, because it would be his only way to avoid a devastating bankruptcy. Mr. Kittrell, Renata said, addressing the speakerphone, are you still prepared to testify under oath regarding the timeline of Tanya's lifestyle upgrades and the cloud account data? Yes, ma'am. Nash's deep voice filled the room. Just tell me where to park and what time to be there. The deposition is officially scheduled for July 14th, Renata announced, closing her folder. That is exactly 8 weeks from today. His lawyer will try every trick in the book to delay the proceedings, but we have an emergency-urgency argument. Archer is actively using marital funds to build a second household for a pregnant woman. The judge will force them to the table. 8 weeks. The next 2 months required a level of psychological endurance I did not know I possessed. Archer and I lived like two silent ghosts occupying the exact same house. I moved all of my clothes into the spare guest bedroom, citing severe back pain and a need for better sleep quality. We barely exchanged 3 sentences a week. Beck noticed the silence. Children absorb the emotional weather of a house long before they understand the forecast. One evening in late June, while we were sitting at the kitchen island eating dinner, Beck pushed his plate away and looked up at me. "Mom," he said quietly, "are you and Dad getting a divorce?" I set my fork down. I did not insult his intelligence with a lie, and I did not burden him with the ugly details. "Yes, baby," I answered softly. "We are." Beck nodded slowly, processing the word. "Okay, can I still live here in this house?" "Always," I promised him, reaching across the counter to squeeze his hand. "You will always live right here." Archer was barely home anymore. He spent almost every single evening at the new 3-bedroom condominium in Cinco Ranch. He never bothered to turn off his location-sharing application. Every night, I would open my phone, look at the blue dot resting securely over Tanya's address, and capture a digital screenshot. I was building a mountain of undeniable evidence, automatically and effortlessly, while he slept in another woman's bed. I sat in my office at Hargrove Construction one afternoon in early July, watching the blue dot on my screen during my lunch break. My desk phone rang. It was Renata. "Stop looking at the tracker, Jolene," she said gently. "You have enough evidence to bury him 3 times over. The trap is completely set. Just breathe, and get ready for July 14th. Monday, July 14th, arrived with the suffocating heat typical of a Houston summer morning. I walked into the law offices of Dunn & Varga at 8:45. Renata led me straight into her newly renovated conference room. The large space smelled heavily of fresh paint and expensive new leather upholstery. A long mahogany table stretched across the center of the room. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a bright, unforgiving glow. A tall glass water pitcher sat in the middle of the table. Condensation beaded on the outside of the glass, dripping slowly down to form a small puddle on the polished wood. I sat on one side of the table next to Renata. A certified court reporter sat at the far end, quietly setting up her stenography machine. In front of Renata was a massive stack of thick color-coded folders, neatly organized with bright plastic tabs. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy wooden door opened. Archer walked in, followed closely by his attorney, Grady Pruitt. Archer looked terrible under the bright lights. Deep dark bags hung under his eyes. His usually perfect hair looked slightly unkempt, and the knot of his expensive silk tie was pulled noticeably crooked. He sat down across from me. He did not look at my face. He kept his eyes locked on the thin single folder resting in front of his lawyer. The disparity between our stacks of evidence spoke volumes before a single word was ever recorded. The court reporter swore him in. Renata did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened her first thick folder and began the forensic demolition. "Mr. Sadler," Renata said, her voice smooth and conversational. "Are you familiar with a corporate entity operating under the name Meridian Advisory?" Archer shifted his weight in the leather chair. He glanced quickly at Pruitt. Pruitt offered a brief, barely perceptible nod. "Yes," Archer answered. "It is a consulting firm I engaged for some personal business development." "Personal business development," Renata repeated, writing the phrase on her legal pad. "Can you describe the specific services Meridian Advisory provided to you?" "Marketing consultation," Archer said, clearing his throat. "General strategy. Which ventures specifically? I would have to check my records to give you exact names." Renata opened the first tab in her folder. She slid a printed spreadsheet across the polished wood. Your joint bank account records show 36 consecutive monthly payments to Meridian Advisory, totaling $190,440. The registered agent of Meridian Advisory is Tanya Voss. Miss Voss is your former girlfriend. Is that correct? Pruitt held up a hand. Objection. You are leading the witness. Renata did not even look at him. This is a deposition, Grady. I am allowed to lead. Please answer the question, Mr. Sadler. Archer stared at the spreadsheet. Tanya is a highly qualified marketing professional. A marketing professional with no active website, no listed clients on any professional networking platform, no business license beyond the initial state registration, and 0 filed tax returns showing any corporate income, Renata stated. Dropping a stack of state tax inquiries onto the table, we checked. Archer opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He closed it again. Renata did not give him a chance to breathe. She moved to the second layer. She produced the property lease for the luxury condominium in Cinco Ranch, showing the monthly rent of $3,800 paid directly from the Meridian account. She established it was the exact address where Tanya Voss currently resided. Then she opened the third folder. She pulled out the 28 printed photographs of the thermal receipts I had found in his laundry. These are your corporate American Express receipts, Mr. Sadler, Renata said, spreading the pictures out so they faced him. They document 28 expensive dinners at high-end Houston restaurants. At the bottom of each receipt, you wrote the client name as T. Voss. Did you expense romantic dinners with your former girlfriend to Petrovex Energy Services? Archer went completely pale. The last trace of his deal closing confidence evaporated into the cold air conditioning of the room. For the record, Renata added softly, my office has already forwarded a complete set of these receipts to the Human Resources Department at Petrovex as a professional courtesy. Pruitt frantically scribbled notes on his legal pad, his face turning an angry shade of red. He leaned over and whispered fiercely into Archer's ear. But Archer was staring blankly at the photographs of his own handwriting. Renata kept going. She pulled out the credit card statements documenting the monthly charges to Flowers by Elaine, matching them perfectly with printed screenshots from Tanya's public social media accounts. She pulled out the parking garage security logs from Texas Women's Hospital, confirming his vehicle was present for 3 separate obstetrician appointments. She established the pregnancy on the official record. Archer's hands began to shake. He placed them flat on the mahogany table, trying to hide the tremors, but his fingers vibrated against the dark wood. Then Renata opened her final folder. She reached inside and pulled out 2 pieces of stiff cardboard. She placed them side by side in the center of the table, right next to the sweating water pitcher. They were identical, generic Hallmark birthday cards. One of these cards was left on the kitchen counter for my client on the morning of April 12th, Renata said, pointing her silver pen at the first card. The other card was found in a box of personal items belonging to Tanya Voss. Archer stared at the 2 cards. He looked at the matching cakes printed on the front. He looked at the identical black ink scrawled across the bottom of each one. Happy birthday, baby. He had no idea I possessed the second card. The realization that I had reached completely outside our marriage, outside his control, and connected the pieces of his parallel lives hit him with physical force. He slumped back against the leather chair, looking suddenly very small and incredibly tired. Right at that exact moment, the heavy wooden door to the conference room swung open. Cynthia Vale walked in holding a single white envelope. My apologies for the interruption, counselor, Cynthia said, stepping up to the edge of the table. I am here on behalf of my client, Opal Sadler. I have a time-sensitive legal document for Mr. Sadler. Cynthia placed the envelope directly in front of Archer. It was the formal demand recalling her signature as the guarantor on the house. The document explicitly stated he had exactly 90 days to completely refinance the $480,000 mortgage in his name alone, or the lending bank would immediately call the loan due and begin foreclosure proceedings. Archer stared at the letter. His eyes darted from the legal demand to my face. You called my mother? He whispered, his voice cracking. I sent her a single photograph. Archer, I replied, my voice steady and completely calm. She handled the rest. I watched his face closely. For the first time in the 12 years I had known him, I saw genuine, absolute terror. It was not anger. It was not his usual defensive manipulation. It was pure fear. Opal was the one person in the world whose opinion he could not spin, charm, or manage. Opal had lived this exact story with his father, and she had chosen to walk away. Now, she was choosing to walk away from him. Pruitt slammed his pen down on the table. We are taking a break. Right now. We are going off the record. Pruitt grabbed Archer by the arm and practically pulled him out of the room, shutting the heavy door behind them. Muffled voices leaked through the wood. Pruitt's voice was low and urgently angry. Archer's voice was rising in panic. Renata leaned back in her chair and took a sip from her glass of water. He cannot refinance that house, Renata said quietly to me. Not with his massive spending history, not with a second household draining his assets, and certainly not with a termination for cause coming from Petrovex. So what happens now? I asked. He settles, Renata answered, a small, satisfied smile touching the corners of her mouth. He settles entirely on our terms. Or he loses the house, he loses his job, and he loses the court case publicly. He has no moves left. 2 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon, Pruitt formally called Renata to capitulate. His client was willing to discuss immediate settlement terms to avoid a public trial. The intense negotiation period lasted exactly 2 weeks. We dictated every single line of the final agreement. I received 62% of all community property, which was the standard Texas disproportionate share awarded in cases of proven adultery and severe financial dissipation. The court credited the entire $230,000 he had wasted on his parallel life directly back to my side of the ledger. They did not force Tanya to return the cash. They simply adjusted the remaining marital assets, so I received $230,000 more from our shared accounts and retirement funds. The house was transferred entirely into my name. Once the title cleared the county clerk, Opal signed a new document acting as a guarantor for me alone. Between my salary at Hargrove Construction and my growing freelance bookkeeping income, I could easily afford the monthly payments. Archer was also made legally responsible for every single dollar of marital debt he had incurred to fund his affair. Custody of Beck was settled quickly. I was named the primary physical conservator. Beck would live with me in the house he had grown up in. Archer received a standard possession order. At 8 years old, Beck had quietly expressed a strong preference to stay with me. Archer did not put up a fight. He knew Beck would eventually grow up, do the math, and understand exactly why our family broke apart. The professional fallout arrived before the ink on the divorce decree was even dry. Renata's courtesy notification to the Human Resources Department at Petrovex triggered a massive internal audit. The company investigators pulled 3 years of Archer's expense reports. They matched his 28 submissions for client entertainment against Tanya's background check. The result was swift and entirely ruthless. Archer was terminated for cause due to expense fraud and gross misrepresentation. He was walked out of the building by security. He received absolutely no severance package. His $285,000 annual salary vanished overnight. A few days later, an attorney representing Tanya Voss contacted our office. Tanya wanted to settle the shell company issue quietly and avoid any further legal exposure. She claimed she had absolutely no idea the money she received was stolen community property. She offered to cooperate fully and return any physical assets purchased through Meridian Advisory. "Do you actually believe her?" I asked Renata when she relayed the message. "It does not matter what I believe," Renata told me, closing the final file. "She is 7 months pregnant. The money stream has completely dried up, and she is terrified of being dragged into a civil lawsuit. We take the settlement, and we close the book." September arrived with a subtle shift in the wind, bringing the first faint promise of autumn to Houston. It was a Saturday morning, exactly 5 months since my birthday. I woke up in the master bedroom of my house. Archer had moved his remaining boxes out 3 weeks earlier. He was currently renting a cramped studio apartment in Katy. It was a brutal piece of irony that he was now living in the exact same economic conditions my mother had died in. I walked into the kitchen. It was bright, impeccably clean, and perfectly quiet. The air smelled of dark roast coffee and cinnamon. It was my coffee, my kitchen, my morning. There was absolutely no trace of Dior Sauvage anywhere in the house. I opened the junk drawer next to the refrigerator to grab a pen. The generic birthday cards were gone forever. The space now held Beck's school permission slips and a neat stack of my newly printed business cards. I poured a mug of coffee and walked down the hall to my home office. It was no longer a little nook crammed into a spare room. I had moved my operation into the large space that used to be Archer's entertainment room. I had painted the walls a soft gray and installed a large solid oak desk. A massive whiteboard hung on the wall facing the window. At the top of the board, I had written Sadler Forensic Services, Client Onboarding Checklist. I had officially registered my own limited liability company. Unlike Archer, I knew exactly how to file the paperwork legally and transparently. Thanks to a few quiet referrals from Margaret Hargrove, I already had 3 small business clients paying retainer fees for independent forensic bookkeeping. I heard the rapid thud of footsteps in the hallway. Beck ran into the office, already wearing his sneakers. He was lighter. He smiled, much easier. He no longer walked through the hallways counting his father's heavy footsteps, and he no longer sat at the kitchen island trying to read the invisible tension vibrating in the air. "Mom," Beck said, bouncing slightly on his heels, "can we go to the zoo today?" I smiled. The zoo. The exact place where I had stood on the hot concrete, staring at a photograph that ended my old life. "The zoo sounds absolutely perfect," I told him, picking up my car keys from the desk. "Can we go see the giraffes first?" "We will always go see the giraffes first," I promised. Beck turned to run back down the hall, but he stopped in the doorway. He looked back at me, his young eyes studying the whiteboard, the thick ledgers stacked on my desk, and the laptop glowing with financial data. "Mom?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, baby? Do you work hard for us?" I stopped moving. I looked at my son. 5 months ago, sitting in the kitchen while Archer drove away to meet another woman, Beck had asked a different version of that question. "Daddy works hard for us, right?" I had swallowed my pride and lied to him to protect an illusion. Now, he was asking about me. And the answer was the absolute truth. "Yeah, baby," I said, my voice strong and clear. "I do." I did not add that his father did not. I did not call Archer a liar or a thief in front of him. I stayed quiet because Beck deserved the right to grow up, examine the evidence, and draw his own conclusions when he was old enough to understand the math. As a forensic bookkeeper, I believed in letting the data speak for itself. I looked down at the watch on my left wrist. It was my mother's Timex. I had replaced the frayed brown strap with a new band of thick, dark leather, but I kept the old scratched glass face. My mother had bought this watch with the last $35 she possessed. The cheap watch had outlasted her terrible marriage. It had outlasted my father. It had outlasted her life. And now, it had completely outlasted Archer. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from Opal illuminated the screen. "Are you coming over for dinner on Tuesday? I am making a brisket. Beck can help me bake a pie." I picked up the phone and typed my reply. "We will be there." Opal was my former mother-in-law, but the title no longer fit the reality of our relationship. She was just Opal now. She was the woman who had chosen to protect me instead of protecting her own son. Opal had lost Archer, but she had gained Beck. And she had gained me. I closed the lid of my laptop. I picked up one of my new business cards from the stack on the desk. Jolene Sadler, Certified Public Accountant, Forensic Bookkeeping Services. I propped the small white card up on the wooden bookshelf, placing it right next to a framed photograph of my mother and a picture of Beck playing baseball. Beck was standing by the front door, pulling his baseball cap down over his forehead. "Are you ready, Mom?" he called out. "I am ready," I answered. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the office. I took one last look around the kitchen. This house used to be a place where his massive lies filled every silent corner. Now, it was just a house that belonged to me, to Beck, and to the numbers. I locked the front door behind me. The heavy deadbolt clicked solidly into place. The Timex watch ticked a steady rhythm against my pulse. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. We were going to the zoo. We were going to see the giraffes. I had recovered $207,360 of stolen money. But as I walked down the driveway toward my car, breathing in the fresh autumn air, I knew the most valuable thing I had taken back was the one thing you could never put a price on. You cannot afford to close your eyes and hand over the keys to your financial survival. Marriage is built on love and trust, but true security requires you to keep both eyes wide open. When you ignore the small inconsistencies, the unexplained receipts, the defensive arguments over budgets, and the bank accounts you never look at, you are not protecting your relationship. You are only protecting a lie. Taking control of your own money does not mean you are preparing for your marriage to fail. It means you are ensuring that no matter what happens, you will never be left entirely powerless. Your future is far too valuable to leave completely in someone else's hands. Have you ever discovered a secret that forced you to completely rebuild your life? And what was the first step you took to take your power back? Tell us your story in the comments below, because your survival might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today.